Thank you for taking out the time for joining us today for today's webinar titled Financing Just Energy Transition Reflection from Global South Economies. We are just going to be joined by our speakers for today. So please allow us a couple of minutes. So I think we can start the webinar while our speakers join. So just to continue, the session is today hosted by IEEFA, the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, a global energy finance think tank committed to accelerating the transition to a diverse, sustainable, and profitable energy economy. My name is Shantanu Srivastav, and I lead the Sustainable Finance and Climate Risk Research at IEEFA South Asia. So let me quickly walk you through the session structure for today. To start with, we'll have a welcome address by Ms. Vibhuti Garg, who is the Director South Asia at IEEFA. Following which, we are privileged to have Mr. A.K. Rastogi, Chairman, Jharkhand Just Transition Task Force, who will give the keynote address for the session. After Mr. Rastogi's remarks, my colleague Gaurav Upadhyay will give a brief presentation on the results from recent stakeholder consultation in India, highlighting the institutional gaps, landscape, and opportunities for developing a comprehensive just transition financing architecture in the country. It will also set the stage for a discussion, a 50-minute discussion with our panelists for today, where we'll explore how different countries are designing and implementing financing mechanisms for just transition and how learning from global South economies, including South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia, inform just transition financing strategies in other global South economies. We'll open the floor to question and answer session post that, but please feel free to post your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll address them during the discussion when we can. Lastly, we are also privileged to have Mr. Nick Robbins, who is the Chair, Just Transition Finance Lab and Professor in Practice at the London School of Economics, giving the closing remarks for the session. And please note that this session is being recorded. Now, with that, I would ask Vibhuti if you could probably start with providing your welcome address while we fix why the other speakers have not been able to join.
Thanks, Shantanu. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, wherever you are joining us from. It's truly wonderful to see such an incredible gathering today, and I really want to extend a very warm welcome to all our participants and our distinguished speakers. We are facing some technical issues, but hopefully that will be sorted very soon, and our speakers will be able to join us shortly. We are here today to discuss a critical issue, financing a just transition. The idea is simple but powerful. As we shift away from fossil fuels, I think we must ensure that workers, communities, and regions are not left behind. The clean energy transition must not only be fast, but it has to be fair. So without addressing the social and economic dimensions, we risk deepening existing inequalities. This challenge is especially significant for the global South, where millions of livelihoods still depend on fossil fuels. And at the same time, countries in our region, face the urgent need to meet development goals, expand affordable energy access, and reduce poverty. This makes financing a just transition not just complex, but also absolutely essential. At IFA, we have been working on these issues at multiple levels. In Jharkhand, which is one of the most fossil fuel dependent states, we are working with the Just Transition Task Force, and we also have Mr. Rastogi ji here today, talk about some of that work. As part of that work, at the subnational level, we are modeling transition costs and exploring a sustainable finance framework. At the national level, we are engaging with regulators, Niti Aayog, ministries, and corporates to build a shared vision of what a financing ecosystem for just transition could look like. Through today's webinar, we want to share some key insights from these national conversations, which our team had over the past several few months, and more importantly, learn from our colleagues across the global South who will bring valuable experience and perspectives. Our goal is to build collective pathways, that makes the energy transition both equitable as well as sustainable. With this, thank you once again for joining us. We look forward to a rich and engaging discussion that helps move this important conversation forward. Thank you. And I will hand it back to Shantanu.
Thank you so much, Vibhuti, for that welcome remark. I think the keynote address for today may have to wait a bit as Mr. Rastogi is just joining. And I think, Gaurav, you can probably start with the presentation first while Mr. Rastogi joins, and we can have his keynote address probably after the presentation. I know that's not ideal, but we'll have to, go with the flow. So over to you, Gaurav.
Sure. Thanks, Shantanu. So I'll just share my presentation. Just give me a sec. Hope you can see my screen. Yeah. So hi everyone. Just to give you idea, as Vibhuti pointed out, that financing is one of the major aspect of the JTA ecosystem, and we recently did a study to find out, or basically to understand, what is the just transition financing system exists in India, how the stakeholders perceive the just transition and the finances flow, as well as what actions need to be taken to improve this ecosystem. So just to give you a little bit idea about the report and some of the key aspect of the report, how we started was we have done some stakeholder mapping on the interest and influence metrics. Then we did a bit of scoping analysis where we assess some of the schemes as well as some of the policies of these stakeholders and how they, interact with the JT financing ecosystem. Then we try to understand what kind of financial flows, flow through all these stakeholders, and we come across some of the recommendations, or you can say some of the actions which can actually provide a pathway to improve this JT financing ecosystem. So I'll just discuss these aspects in some brief introduction. So as I mentioned, that first we did stakeholder mapping from the high interest and influence interest and influence metrics. Through this, we map these stakeholders in four quadrants. Uh, First is the key players, which is basically showing the high influence and high interest, key players, which actually has a high influence on the financial flows into the JD system. Also, they have the high interest or the mandate, which can which create an interest of these stakeholders in the JT financial flows. These are some of the regulators, international development agencies, state governments like the Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, which will be on the forefront of this just transition, as well as some of the large public sector enterprises like CCL, which has quite a high stake in the JT process as well. Then we have on the other side is the high influence and low interest, quadrant, which is the potential allies. Some of these are, central governments and, which not directly related to JT, but they have potential to become key players as well. So presently, if we see the rural development department, agriculture, labor, they can influence the economic diversification in the JT paradigm. But presently, they don't have the mandate to do that or the interest to do. But this is a dynamic group. As we mature and do some of the policy building, they can become a key player as well. Then we have supporters where we have the philanthropies, NGOs. These are having very high interest in the JT, but have a bit, limited scope of influencing the decisions. So there, I think we also need to do some of the capacity building to bring them to the key players as well. And then we have the observer group like the general public, small businesses, media outlets, which need to be informed and educated about the JT and its impact. Now coming into the analysis metrics, like we did a thorough analysis of the policies of some of the key players like the regulator, you see SEBI and RBI, and tried to find out what kind of positive levers are exist in the present system, what are the challenges, provided some of the recommendation, and came up some of the potential areas for collaboration as well with the different stakeholders. So as you see, just to give you one example, in the positive levers, like we see, the SEBI has recently, notified the BRSR framework. It's very good in terms of engaging with the corporates, but it has challenges like it doesn't, cater to JT specific matrices in the existing regulations. So one recommendation is to, include some of the JT specific matrices in the, disclosure framework, and where the potential area of collaboration is like some of these think tanks are actually working on this area, and they can actually work with SEBI to bring out some of the indicators which can actually get integrated into the SEBI's BRSR framework and provide that direction. Similarly, if you see presently in the say RBI's framework, the risk materiality of JT is not even considered in the financial ecosystem, which itself has to be taken care of if the financial system has to take care of the risk associated with it. So one of the recommendation in the potential area of collaboration is that some of the think tanks can conduct a joint research on the JT's risk materiality for the financial sector and how it can actually influence if it is not being taken care of. And similarly, there are different, groups are there which can actually form an exchange knowledge like NGFS, which can be leveraged for the, potential areas of collaboration. Now, these are, regulators, but we have also did this exercise for Ministry of Finance, where, some of the areas like the specific JT fund and, the strengthening of climate change financing unit that also come up. Similarly, MOEFCC, we also, actually we identified some of the positive levers like GCF, CAMPA, GCP. These are some of the funding avenues which are already available and can be utilized in some of the economic diversification activities. So this is one exercise we have taken, and similarly we have done for Niti Aayog. How Niti Aayog can influence some of the central government ministries and the schemes. Now come to the the just transition financing ecosystem. So we also try to find out or try to understand how the finance as well as the policy and regulatory input flows in the system. Uh, as you see from the diagram, if we just concentrate on the the green areas, these are some of the major financing sources like the banks, NBFCs, MFIs, and institutional investors. Similarly, the other investors are also there. So if you see the bank, NBFC, and MFIs, these are basically influenced by the regulators like RBI and SEBI. Similarly, MDBs can actually provide the finances to the central government ministries as well as state government. And one of the important source of finances is the philanthropies, which actually can provide the finances to NGOs and CSOs, which flows to the local ecosystem as well. So here, uh, the RBI and SEBI plays a major role, which can actually influence these major financing sources. Similarly, the MDBs, the international, the multilateral development banks can also play the similar role. The one role which central government ministries also plays, apart from providing the financial input, they can also provide the policy input, which is very important for some of the finances to flow to the local ecosystem through the state government as well. As you see, some of the major PSUs can also provide to the local ecosystem, like the CIL and other PSUs who are working on the areas. Uh, Two very important organizations which directly doesn't provide the financial input, but were very important in providing the policy directions, like the Niti Aayog, which provide the policy direction to the central government ministries, which in terms flow the finances to the local ecosystem. So this is one of the, we can say, simplistic representation of the system. The actual system is much more complex, and there are some interconnections which I have not shown in here, but mostly exist and also influence these decisions. So where I think if we see the role of the regulators and other agencies plays a major role, which can actually devise policies to direct these flows to the local ecosystem. Now through these stakeholder consultations, we try to devise a pathway to improve the JT financing ecosystem. We divided the action points into three categories. One is the short term, like the action point, which uh, can be integrated in 0 to 2 years, the medium term 2 to 5 years, and long terms like 5+ years. So if we see financial regulators like RBI, SEBI have already mentioned some of the points, like we can integrate the just transition indicators into BRSR disclosures. Similarly, some of the instruments like the social bond, ESG bonds, these are some of the sustainable financial products. So some of the non-binding principles we can also include in this, where whoever uses that need to provide some of the indicators that they are working on just transition related aspects as well. Similarly, RBI can include just transition into its priority sector lending operation as well. We come into the medium term, RBI can actually integrate the transition risk planning and also include the social aspects of it. Similarly, on the long term, RBI can also provide JT financing windows, which can actually provide a little bit of extra funding for the JT related activities as well. Then we come to financial institutions, MDBs, investors. So what they can do. So first is to integrate the just transition as a material risk and try to find out where the opportunity of the lending and investment. Then MDBs have a very good role to play, where they can actually offer the concessional finances and technical assistance, which is very much needed in the just transition related activities. Now, similarly, if we see banks and FIs can actually integrate the just transition criteria into loan assessment and mainstream the financial product in the medium term. And similarly, long term, I think similar to the RBI recommendation, they can create some financing platforms for the MSMEs and local businesses, so that the job losses and other things can be taken care in the long term. Now, when it comes to the government ministries and policy institutions, so I think in the short term, the policy decisions matters a lot. So first thing the Minister of Finance can do is to define the just transition as per the local context. Presently, there is no India-specific definition or the framework which actually can guide these policy decisions. So MOF can take this decision forward. Similarly, some of the MOEFCC funds that can actually be taken care um, in these decisions. Similarly, Niti Aayog can also provide some direction and policy coherence, which can actually transmit to other ministries as well. On the medium term, I think MOF can look into establishing a national just transition fund, which will be very important for some of the activities where in just transition these activities don't generate the returns, but is very essential for the just transition paradigm. Similarly, MOP can also support the phase out of coal and reskilling and repurposing of the workers in the long term. State governments, because these state governments will be in the forefront of the conducting a socio-economic impact assessment. So basically, one thing they right now the state governments can do is to conduct the state-specific socio-economic impact assessment, try to find out what are the sectors or the areas which will bear the brunt of the just transit, basically a transition, and how to lessen the impact on these sectors and create some economic diversification roadmap. Similarly, I think one of the things will be necessary to create just transition fund at the state level as well, so that the local context and local actions can be taken care of. Then we have they can try to develop the local skill development and employment program, and also institutionalize the just transition planning in state development policies. A long-term suggestion would be to, as the transition happens in these states, they will get some of the taxes or revenues from the other sectors, which can actually be utilized to support the affected communities and the regions. Now, corporates would be also, in the forefront alongside the state governments, and they also need to work presently, if you see in the short term, on their own workforce, like map the workforce which will be displaced because of the transition, and also see not only their operation, but the operations of their suppliers and MSMEs which they are interacting, where the impact will be, and try to understand what kind of JT matrices they can also include in their transition plan. Now, medium term, I think the industry-wise reskilling and capacity building would be required as well. In the long term, I think it would be very important for the corporates to work with the government to advocate or co-fund the public-private just transition activities, where some of the activities where revenues can be generated. So I think there the involvement of corporates will be very much needed. Similarly, if we see the CSOs and the research organizations, I have pointed out earlier as well, that they also need to support the national and subnational stakeholders, like in the national stakeholders, like in defining just transition, assess the material risk. Then at the subnational level, also what would be the transition impact, what is the fiscal needs, or and support the evidence base for the policy design and recommendation. Then in skill development, they can play a major role in the medium term, and also try to develop some of the localized tools or models where the fiscal planning and social protection can also be, roped in. In the long term, I think CSOs and research institutions have to be more community oriented, where they need to lead the resilience building programs and also monitor the long-term transition outcomes where, which, induced by the, just transition measures taken by the other stakeholders, and try to find out what kind of, policy directions on, changes are needed or gap needs to be filled in. So these are some of the recommendations we have suggested in the short term, medium terms, and long term. And this is not an exhaustive list, but yeah, this is one of these some of the actions. If we can complete in these terms, then we can improve the just transition financing ecosystem quite a lot in India. Now, I have just shown some the report link which is there on our website. I'll also, put that in the chat box. So whoever wants to read the report, I'll encourage you to, read the full report, and we will welcome any feedback or suggestion you would have for the report as well. Yeah. Thanks everybody, and over to you, Shantanu.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gaurav, for that insightful presentation. I think that really sets the stage for the discussion that we're going to have. But before that, we have been joined by Mr. A.K. Rastogi, Chairman, Jharkhand Just Transition Task Force. Sir, it would be, I'm really sorry for the trouble in joining in, but could you please provide your valuable keynote remarks for this particular session?
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Could you probably speak a bit
Okay.
near to the speaker?
Okay. Just give me a second. Yeah, is it better now, Shantanu?
Yes, I think this is perfect.
Okay.
Over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I was just listening to Gaurav, presentation. See, I think a lot of diverse people are here. I see it's about 90, more than 90 people are around. So they may not be familiar with, topography of Jharkhand, why Jharkhand and what Jharkhand is doing, why we are doing just transition in Jharkhand. So I'll spend few minutes on, about Jharkhand. So as this is Jharkhand is one of the states situated in eastern, central and eastern part of India. And we maintain, energy supply to the country. We supply around 26% of country's coal demand. And we have 28 administrative districts in our state, out of which right now half of the state is dependent on fossil fuel for their economy. 12 districts are producing coal, and 5 districts economy is dependent on fossil fuel. And one more district is likely to produce coal in next coming year. And other than coal, we have 40% mineral reserve of the country, and which is very important. Over the last, more than 100 years, we have been developing, extraction economy in our state. And in collaboration with IEEFA, we did our, fiscal analysis. As compared to any other state in India, our dependence on fossil fuel is much, much higher than, any other state like Odisha, Chhattisgarh. Our 32% revenue is coming from fossil fuel. Then you can understand the, dependence of a state on fossil fuel. And when India committed that by 2070 we'll attain net zero, it became very imminent for us to plan that how our economy is going to transit from fossil fuel based economy to non-fossil fuel based economy. 2022, government of Jharkhand has constituted the task force, which is the first of its kind body in India, not only in India, in Southeast Asia also. The bigger problem, what Gaurav was saying, that how do we define just transition and where is the framework? And I am happy to share that Jharkhand has been able to define sustainable just transition, and we have released the framework. And we believe if we follow that framework, net zero or can be achieved within the given timeline. I was just listening to him, and what are the you need to understand, this is quite different from any other state, or if you look at European Union or America, that just transition context in India is quite different, and similarly it is in Southeast Asia. Our dependence not only on direct coal mine workers or thermal power plants, our dependence of induced ecosystem, which is in and around these thermal assets or coal assets, which is much higher than the Europe. So when we are talking about transition from fossil fuel to non-fossil fuel, we need to develop a comprehensive roadmap for just transition in our state or in even in India. So we have identified, just how it can be just, how it can be equitable, how it can be gender specific or inclusivity or sustainability. So we have identified 8 thematic area, which is very important for planning. The first and foremost for, when dependence on ecosystem is very high and livelihood opportunities are there, not only on formal ecosystem, but informal ecosystem, livelihood opportunities are there. So the immediate task for the state is that we need to plan for economic diversification, which can cater need of the people when transition do takes place. How we do it? Gaurav was talking about skilling, upskilling, capacity building, economic diversification. So we are working upon that. 96% of our state electricity or this energy, it comes from fossil fuel. So transforming that entire ecosystem, fossil fuel to greener energy, that is also very important. So we are working on energy transition also. More than 100 mines are operational in Jharkhand right now. So coal transition, when we phase out these coal mines or thermal power plants, India coal is going to peak around 2047, and after then there will be a decline. So these assets needs to be repurposed or environmental rehabilitation or reclamation needs to be done. So that will require huge amount of money and effort from both from the government sector and from the public sector. How we can do that? That is also we are working on coal transition also. Another area which needs to be tackled, because we have a large number of vehicles which are involved for interstate or within the state in mining activity for the transportation of ore. Sustainable mobility and long haul vehicle transportation is also going to be very important. And we will not achieve this if we do not tackle the decarbonization, because Jharkhand is one of the largest producer of the steel in the country. So club with that, the entire, program of just transition become very, very important and very, very widespread. Unless we tackle these, we will not be able to achieve. When we started working on sustainable just transition, the biggest problem was the capacity building. People were not able to appreciate what is sustainable just transition means, how it is going to work, how it is going to impact the state economy, how do we plan. So I am happy to share that initially we launched our vision documents, which frames what is the vision of the government, and recently we have launched our sustainable just transition framework. And according to that framework, finance is very, very important. How do we finance? How do we do it? That is also very important. And that is today's topic also for the talk. See, nothing moves without finance. And states or majority of time, they are dependent on devolution or grant from the central government, or their internal resources are there. How do we align? And this is a long-term planning for the just transition. It is not happening tomorrow. This is a long-term planning. How do you create that capacity? I'll start from the last point, that you have to create capacity if it has to happen at some national level, because happening will happen in the states. The capacity building of all the institution responsible for sustainable just transition, that needs to be done. Otherwise, what will happen? We'll keep on talking only, and they will not be able to. This will not be able to be absorbed. So what we did, we started making capacity within all the department. It is not that you deal with the Ministry of Power or Department of Energy in the state or Department of Finance. So I am working with almost 17 departments and agencies. Initially, when you plan for just transition, though they should be able to understand, then only, just transition at subnational is going to be really fruitful. Otherwise, what will happen, we'll always look for Government of India that some planning, some guidelines are coming. And states like Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Odisha, and this is very, very important even for West Bengal, some of the regions, it is very important that you have to plan early. That is the key for just transition. Planning has to be started right now. So capacity, regarding how do we, get finance? First thing is whenever you approach government, they always look for, how much is the impact, who is going to be impacted, what is the extent of this impact, that needs to be assessed. So we did surveys in 15 districts, and we have realized the dependence on fossil fuel is very, very high. And we always talk about skilling, upskilling, reskilling. So how do we do it? That is important. What kind of institutional mechanism needs to be created within at the subnational level? Where are the examples? We always look for West. I have seen a lot of examples coming from West, from European Union and from America. But where are the examples which can be replicated in India, which can be replicated from Southeast Asia, because our economy, our dependence is quite different from those countries. That is one. Second is, when we talk about, phasing out of coal assets, thermal power assets, this is a long-term planning. And then how do we repurpose those areas which are going to be vacant after, these mines are closed, thermal power plants are closed? How do we repurpose? Because this is an asset. Land is an asset which needs to be repurposed purposefully. Second is, uh, definitely transition will bring stress in the system. So how you can reduce that stress in the system, and then you need to go from subnational level to the execution level, that is the districts. You have to move towards from the subnational level to the districts. It is very important that local when we talk about economic diversification, we need to identify local resources which can be tapped. I would like to share that Jharkhand has more than 33% of the forest. And when we did, dependence study, we realized that quite a large chunk of the population is still dependent on agriculture. And you cannot visualize a development without agriculture in the state of Jharkhand, because the dependence is very, very high. And how do you substitute that income level which is coming from fossil fuel dependent assets? How you can substitute that income, that is also very important. We cannot afford migration, because migration never brings prosperity. So economic diversification plans have to be prepared depending on the locally available resources. So that needs to be done. Gaurav has already explained everything, so I need not to repeat that. If I come to straight to, because the paucity of time is there, because if we come to the transition, the biggest problem I said, it's creating the capacity within the mind, within the policymaker. And then realigning your priorities within the state. How you can create a dedicated sustainable just transition or just transition fund within the state. You can pool resources, how you can pool resources. Because in the government, biggest problem is if you do not create dedicated authority or a fund, there are two things. One, dedicated authority is also required, and a dedicated fund is also required, so that you can pool. Otherwise, in the government system, if you do not create authority, you will not be able to pool fund. That is it. That is the problem. So some administrative mechanism in the state, like we have task force, or a dedicated mechanism is immediately required in the states. So dedicated just transition fund, which can, that is also needs to be created immediately. Aligning your priorities, you can identify. We have doing a lot of spending in greener sectors. How you can align your budget with the green sector. Green budgeting is also very, very important. Third is, where are the avenues, convergence? A lot of government schemes are there for, for helping you in transition. How you can align those, how you can converge those areas and align your activity within the state, prioritize that this is the priority area which require focus attention from just transition engine. That is also very important. New kind of instrument, I was just going through how we can raise, how state governments, what could be the mechanism, how we can raise green boards, what could be the, how we can raise, fossil fuel is energy security of the country. Can we have a structure like carbon tax? States, when we have polluters to pay principle, we have supplying more around 30% fossil fuel, and 99% of the industrial fuel, that is cooking coal, that is Jharkhand is producing. So if something, if that adverse impact is taking place, how it can be mitigated by different instruments. How philanthropy can help a state government, how this blending finance, or that is also possible. But what is needed it immediately is that policy makers and administrators needs to be educated. They are not aware. They say this transition, when we talk, they always, there is a, I was beyond Jharkhand, I visited some of the state. They were saying that this is a long-term planning for 2070. It's not tomorrow. But if you have to smoothen the impact of transition, it has to be, you need to plan today different financing instruments, because new instruments are there, like when electricity futures are now there. So we need to identify areas, we need to diversify, blending finance in green sectors. Green sector require a lot of hand holding, not only by the government, but public-private partnership that is required. Second, uh, uh, different, CSOs, philanthropies, different research organizations, what they can help state government identifying the problem, because there may be a policy gap within, what reforms are required into our policy framework. That is also very, very important. And I am happy that task force in Jharkhand, with the help of various research partners and with the help of IEEFA, we are able to showcase before policy makers. Sensitization has already been done. Sensitization already been done, and people are, now next year onward, 2000, because this year 26, 27 budget, you will see definitely some what you call historical decision taken by the Jharkhand government. And to cater this, you need to have one dedicated authority. You call task force, you call commission, you call something. And in that commission, you need to have representation from various, think tanks, various research organizations who can guide, because, uh, we need to
Excuse me,
work
sir.
together.
Sorry, just to interrupt you, just in the looking at my watch, if you could just,
Okay.
I know there is so
No,
much that we can talk about the task force, but yeah, if you could just
yeah.
wrap it up in 1 minute, we'll just have the panel discussion
So
after.
only
Thank you
only
so much.
two takeaways, Shantanu. Uh, Capacity building of policymaker on understanding sustainable just transition at sub-national level, because happening has to have at sub-national level. Policy can be by Niti Aayog or at national level, but happening has to be there. So capacity building at ground level and helping, state government in aligning their priorities towards green and sustainable finance. That is very important. These are the two, I think, from two two key points I would like to emphasize. And another one, the last, that states needs to plan early, wherever, beyond even in Southeast Asia countries, where when, ultimately from climate risk, it is very, very important that we need to plan early. Thank you very much, Shantanu, for giving me this opportunity, and
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
Vibhuti. Thank you. Lot to speak, but time is
Yes,
limited.
sir.
But thank you very
I
much.
think there's
Yeah.
so much to learn from the experience of Jharkhand, not just for India, some nations across the world. And I think we should definitely have a masterclass from you alone, for all the different speakers. But thank you so much. I think you've almost put together a playbook for what constitute a credible just transition strategy, which could actually be followed by different, stakeholders across emerging markets. And like you rightly said, it all starts with credible capacity building, and everything follows. And with that, I think that it also gives us a perfect segue into our panel discussion today. And I would like to ask our speakers to please switch on their cameras so that you're visible to all the audience. Great. So I'll just introduce the speakers for today's session. Uh, so first we have Mr. Nick Robbins, who is the chair, Just Transition Finance Lab and professor in practice sustainable finance at the London School of Economics. We have Ms. Amanda Khoza, who is the senior associate, Zeni Zeni Sustainable Finance, who is joining us today from South Africa. We have Mr. Pedro Spadale, senior fellow for subnational governments at the Climate and Society Institute, who's joining us from Brazil. Then we have Ms. Mutya Justika, who's the research and engagement lead, Indonesia Energy Transition at IEEFA, joining from Indonesia. And I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Thank you so much for taking out the time and wanting to share your experiences and learnings in just transition financing with us. So Nick, let me start with you to just set the context. If you can hear me, okay, you're there. Great. So we keep hearing about this 100 billion goal. Now the upgraded 300 billion goal as part of the NCQG, and we know that emerging market stakeholders know that this is not enough. And within that capital stack itself, if we see the capital that is appropriate for financing just transition, right, assets and economic activities, that is still less. But having said that, as part of your work also at the lab, we've seen that there are several transactions that have taken place in emerging markets, which actually gives some good lessons in terms of how to put together JT financing mechanisms which can mobilize capital into these specific assets and economic activities. So on the basis of your work, can you share some of these key learnings and examples which could be adopted readily by other markets?
Thanks so much, Shantanu and IEEFA, and it's a privilege as someone who sits in the global north to be invited to a meeting about the global south, and I acknowledge that. That's really good. And I could listen to Mr. Rastogi for hours, so he's a real leader in what he's doing in Jharkhand, so thanks so much. I think the research that IEEFA has been doing and many others really shows that we need to think very, very carefully about the different types of finance and their role in the just transition, from grant-based finance from governments and philanthropies through to concessional finance from development banks, particularly through to market rate finance. So we have a spectrum of just transition finance, and it's very important to see that. You mentioned, Shantanu, the global picture, so 2.4 trillion that's needed in so-called emerging markets by 2030. The estimate is that for specific social investment in just transition, it's about 40 billion. So quite a small amount of money, but that may be a very small areas around skilling and so on. So at the LSE's Just Transition Finance Lab, one of the areas we have been looking at is case studies. We've looked at a few. They're not that many. We've looked at renewables developers in India. We've looked at a cold clean process in Chile with a sustainability-linked bond. And we've looked forward to the Philippines, where there's work underway to develop transition credits using the carbon market to accelerate coal to clean transitions, and with just transition inside. So I think the lessons, and you asked about sort of the lessons, is threefold maybe. And this is where I think the work you're doing in India and also in other countries, emerging countries, Brazil, Philippines, Indonesia, and so on, South Africa, is so important. Is start early and particularly think about the policy framework. That clearly came across in our work from Chile, that actually you need this firm policy signal from governments at the national level and the provincial level. And that provides the context in which different transactions can take place. I think the second is the really important role of grant and concessional funding as a kickstart. And here, I think sort of national development banks are particularly important, but also we have international financial institutions such as the IFC, World Bank, ADB, and so on, who can play a role. And I think maybe highlight at the international level the role of the climate investment funds and the Green Climate Fund could play, again, in provision of this sort of concession, more sort of lower cost capital. And the third point I would suggest is the need for standards, and this will maybe come up later in the discussion. Just transition is often a new phrase. It's contested. There's not a single definition. So we do need to have standards about what has integrity. And we need to have standards about community empowerment, the involvement, particularly involvement of informal workforce in this process, and also build on existing frameworks, green, social, sustainability bond frameworks, and so on. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but that question of standards needs to be there. And then a fourth one is, but it's not really a lesson, it's a hope, is how can we consider sort of more innovative mechanisms such as carbon markets to really raise more of that grant and concessional funding for just transition. So thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And I think while the $40 billion figure that you mentioned, that might look small in the overall context of the energy transition, but I think a large part of that would eventually need to come from concessional sources of financing, which a lot of times, while we consider the IFIs like CIF, GCF, it's not that easy to come around. Thank you so much. I think that really sets the stage for our future discussion. And let me now turn to Amanda on this point. Amanda, you come from South Africa, and South Africa has been sort of a front runner when it comes to setting up specific transactions for financing just transition related assets and economic activities, creating detailed investment plans, bringing together diverse capital providers on the table to finance, different aspects of energy transition, just energy transition rather. But being first also meant facing significant implementation hurdles, and I think a lot of us have read about them. And these are particularly moving from planning to an executable pipeline of bankable projects. So from your experiences learning about South Africa's JETP process, what should other countries replicating this similar models, either a JETP or an ETM, keep in mind? So over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Shantanu. And thanks for your thoughts, Nick. I think your point about integrity really resonated with me because one of the lessons and the caveats that I would like to suggest is that there needs to be trust in the system. Otherwise, you're not going to progress much. But just briefly, just for context, our JETP was announced at COP26 in 2021. And it had an initial 8.5 billion dollars pledged, which was later expanded to around $11.6 billion. But I'd just like to put a span in the works and say that by contrast, only about 7% of that is grant funding, while most is in the form of loans or other repayable instruments. And when you drive through, there's a region called Mpumalanga, which is the coal belt in South Africa, which produces over 80% of our coal and our energy. You see these power stations dominating the skyline. At the same time, we do have a renewable energy implementation plan, which is seeing a bit of stalling because they can't connect to the grid. So to answer your question directly, Shantanu, I've thought of 5 lessons for us being pioneers in the JETP space. And the first one is about domestic ownership, which I feel is very important for it to be localized and contextualized. And for us, the JETP only became credible when local institutions took charge. The Presidential Climate Commission ran consultations, and in 2023, the National Treasury embedded the JET implementation plan into the national budget framework. And therefore, for investors, that alignment was the signal that this was not just donor money, but part of domestic fiscal policy. A second lesson I would say is I would term it as wires before what's. We say this in South Africa: the challenge isn't what's, it's wires. Renewable projects were ready, but grid congestion in the coal belt held them back. The creation of the National Transmission Company, which is for new independent transmission projects, and also our national energy regulator had curtailment rules, which were the kind of reforms that made the system more investable. And without transmission reform, then no finance package will unlock scale. Thirdly, matching the right money to the right purpose. Our JET investment plan estimates that $98.7 billion is needed between when we first initiated our JETP, which is 2023, so between 2023 and 2027. And concessional funds are the most valuable for coal decommissioning, social protection, as well as reskilling. And I'd also like to note that, we often speak about the communities where the coal belt is, but we have to think about the full value scale in decarbonization. So upstream, downstream, also supply chains, and manufacturing companies that are linked to the value chain of decarbonization. So if you think about just transition, you have to go through the full value chain. The fourth lesson is macro and utility reform are very essential. Back in 2023, our government announced a 254 billion rand. I didn't convert that into dollars, but it's 18 rands to the dollar. So that was a debt relief package for Eskom. Eskom is our utility, our national utility. So, and on the surface, it was about balance sheets, but for investors, it was a confidence signal that government was stabilizing the utility so it could remain a viable off-taker. And similarly, stabilizing municipalities is critical because arrears undermine distribution creditworthiness. So the lesson there was you cannot separate transition finance from fiscal and utility reform. And lastly, the just must be measurable and must be trusted. So Mpumalanga, 80%. That's our ground zero for the just transition. It includes, so our JET IP includes a portfolio of investments that are geared specifically for that province. It's all about land repurposing. I heard talk about reskilling earlier on, so it's about new skills training, enterprise support, and industrial diversification. And in order to maintain legitimacy, we must publish just transition scorecards alongside financial disclosures, jobs created, SMMEs supported, community outcomes. Without that, the megawatts will rise, but trust will fall. And I just wanted to point out just 4 caveats: and delivery risk, social trust deficit, capital mix challenge, political and fiscal headwinds. Just bearing those in mind as you try and consider learning from what we have encountered in our process. And I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Amanda. And I love you've given such pointed, recommendations and learnings. I think they're totally digestible for anyone who's listening to you right now. And I completely agree on your point on matching the assets with the right set of capital providers. I think that's really important to understand. So while you might have capital on the table, it might not be the most appropriate capital to, let's say, financing skill development, community resilience, enterprise support. So I think that is a very important exercise. And I think the other point that you mentioned about the signaling effect that you send to investors, in terms of political will and in terms of having money on the table from the country itself who's undergoing the JP process is extremely important. Thank you so much for that. And with that, I'll turn to Pedro now. Sorry, Pedro, we've disturbed you on a morning of yours with a lot of back and forth while you were struggling to join. But thank you so much for making it today for this particular webinar. So I just wanted to carry on this conversation further from South Africa to Brazil now. And Brazil, actually, while it does not have a JETP or any ETM of any kind at the moment, there have been several subnational governments which have taken the lead and started setting up their own just transition funds, or at least just transition related plans, which is the first sort of the stepping step for, actually making more instrumental and, diverse just transition planning process across their jurisdictions. So can you share some examples from Brazil, which could actually be not known to the wider public over in the Asian and the African markets? Over to you.
Thank you, Shantanu. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, maybe to you in India, almost reaching the evening. I guess I'm the only one in the morning. I'd like to thank you, Shantanu, and the Institute for Energy, Economics, and Financial Analysis for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be with you and greet also the colleagues in the panel. Shantanu, maybe before starting, I would just say about the strategies, just a few words about one good example of that can illustrate the scale of the challenge that we have here in Brazil when it comes to just transition. I'm speaking to you from the city of Rio de Janeiro, which is the capital of the state of Rio de Janeiro. And there's an interesting story about us. We were, maybe some of you know, we were the capital of the country for almost 200 years. And Rio de Janeiro faced some very interesting challenges throughout its history because in the first half of the 20th century, we lost the economic prominence to São Paulo, our neighboring state. So agriculture became so powerful on the state, and then industries started to settle, not only here in Rio, but also there. And then the financial sector moved to São Paulo. So across the first half of the 20th century, we lost this economic prominence that was explained by being the capital of the country for so much time. After that, in 1960, the capital moved to Brasilia. So it's like Bonn and maybe other cities, not many in the world, that lost the status of being a capital. So we faced a severe crisis, as you can wonder, both economic and social. And then late 80s, we discovered oil, huge reserves of oil offshore in front of the state of Rio. So we like to say in Brazil, there is this saying that God is Brazilian, because in the end of the day, everything happens well. And we say here in Rio de Janeiro that if God is Brazilian, for sure God is from Rio, because it's a beautiful place. And he also put all the oil in front of our state, and it's far, so we cannot even see the platforms. But that gave a huge revamp on the economy of Rio de Janeiro from the late 80s, 90s, and then in the beginning of the 21st century, especially in 2008-9, it was announced the discovery of some huge new oil fields offshore. So the oil production boomed, and now the oil and gas industry represents around a third of our economy, of our GDP. It's a state of the state of Rio de Janeiro. It's a state of around 16 million people, not very much to Indian standards, but it's a state that is heavily dependent, 1/3 of the economy. So you can wonder not only the jobs directly or indirectly related to this industry, but also the incomes, the taxes that come from that to fund all the needs. So when we talk about just transition, and we have faced in the past so many challenges, Rio de Janeiro, and thanks to this industry that we know that we have to transition away from fossil fuels for sure. There's no doubt about it, but it's such a challenge. Otherwise, Rio de Janeiro will face again for the third time another big challenge. So just to contextualize, giving this example of Rio. Coming up into the strategies, we have different strategies to fund the transition. We are using some national governments, as Shantanu mentioned. We are using a combination of some national funds. We have this new climate fund, Fundo Clima, from BNDES. BNDES is the National Development Bank. BNDES, for some years now, it's issuing some sovereign sustainable bonds. And recently it has made the new offers very much bigger offers. Now this fund is having around $2 billion. So some national governments are getting finance from this fund. It's the conditions are good. It's concessional credit. So that's one way, and it's the kind of innovative way of having those sovereign sustainable bonds. We have also some constitutional funds that are regional for our states that exist for a long time, but recently they have some credit lines related to climate, related to sustainable development, either for low carbon agriculture or forest degradation, forest restoration of degraded land. So we also use that. There is the famous Amazon Fund, which now has almost $1 billion. So some national governments use that a lot. We have some individual initiatives, and I would point out maybe what we think that it's the best one, which comes from the state of Espírito Santo, which is a neighboring state of Rio. As Espírito Santo also has some oil fields in front of it, so it receives royalties from the oil exploration. And some years ago, they created this decarbonization fund to put 100% of the royalties coming from the oil industry to fund the transition to a low carbon economy. So this is very innovative, very bold. That was a decision taken by the Espírito Santo state. Of course, to be honest, I gotta share with you that Espírito Santo, in the 27 states of Brazil, it's the state with the best fiscal situation. It's the number one. So as they were in good financial conditions, they have like AAA rating, so they could do this. It's not the case, for example, of the state of Rio that already counts on these royalties for spending with other things. What Rio is doing, and I finalize with that, in general, besides having some credit lines for specific areas of the economy, what Rio is doing is basically what some countries in the Middle East are doing, diversifying economy, investing, giving loans for supporting tech companies to settle here, like startups, fostering R&D centers to be here. So thinking about the economy of the future, services economy, also investing in tourism. That's why we had the Olympics in 2016 and other big events to increase tourism and other branches of the service sector, so we can do this transition in time to elevate other sectors of the economy to be more important as the oil and gas industry goes down with time. So I think I spoke too much, and I saved some time for our Q&A. Thank you, Shantanu.
Thank you so much, Pedro. I think the context at the start, that was really wonderful to know. Having a country have moved capital so much, every probably state among Rio, Sao Paulo, and now Brasilia has something to feel good about, probably. And I think the example that you gave about Espírito Santo is having a mechanism in place, which is moving capital or funds away from oil and gas revenues into new carbon, new economy sectors. I think that's the kind of innovation that is required. And I think the caveat over here is the high, rating that the state particularly has, which essentially tells us that, within the capital markets, when you're talking about not just using your own funds, but also, mobilizing and attracting funds from the private sector, it's extremely important to have a steady and a good credit profile. So thank you so much for that particular example. And with that, I'll move to Mutya, our colleague from Indonesia. Mutya, I think Indonesia, we keep talking about learning lessons from other markets, other emerging markets, set up mechanisms like JETPs. And I think Indonesia has actually done that pretty well. At least when you talk about, setting up a comprehensive investment plan, I think Indonesia's CIPP is one of the most comprehensive ones, which has actually helped in some way or the other bring in close to $20 billion, if I'm not wrong, on the table for the JETP. But I think the problem over there is also still translating, plans to pipelines. And that's where, the action actually needs to focus now. So my question to you is, what are the unique features of Indonesia's plan that stand out compared to other JETPs? And how have the earlier global experiences shaped its design and financing approach? And what now more needs to be done to move from planning to execution of the CIPP? So over to you, Mutya.
Yes, thank you so much, Santanu. Hello, everyone. So yes, I think that's correct that Indonesia Just Energy Transition Partnership stand out among emerging market initiative for its scale and also ambition. At the heart of the program is the Comprehensive Investment and Policy Plans, CIPP, which published 1 year after JETP was established. So the plan identified 5 key areas of focus, from expanding transmission infrastructure, accelerating coal retirement, scaling up renewables, and also domestic supply chain development. So under those plans, JETP aims to achieve a higher target compared to Indonesia NDC commitment, with a target to achieve peaking power sector emissions by 2030 of no more than 250 MT CO2, renewable energy generation share of 44% by 2030, and achievement of net zero emission in the power sector by 2050, like 10 years earlier than the NDC target. But I think the hurdles is the same, like South Africa, like to achieve the target, Indonesia estimate it will need like $97.1 billion in investment to meet its energy transition goal by 2030, with more than 400 priority projects identified and up to $580.3 billion until 2050. But the initial commitment of JETP of $20 billion, which mobilized through the IPG and Japan's, it's a critical start, but it's only covered only a small portion of the total fund needed. So it's only covered like 1/5 of fund needed until 2030. So the same like South Africa, as explained by Amanda, only like around 2.6% of the total JETP commitment in the form of grant. Many portion of its fund is in the form of market loan. So other than that, political will also become a hurdle here in Indonesia. And to answer your question, so what set the CIPP or JETP apart? I think it's because its flexibility. It's designed to evolve, allowing Indonesia to respond to shifting global dynamics and also domestic priorities rather than locking into a static roadmap. So during the CIPP launch in November 2023, Indonesia's coordinating minister for maritime affairs and investment explicitly stated that the CIPP is a living document that will be updated annually and serve as a non-binding foundation rather than a fixed roadmap. So that's why currently the JETP Secretariat or working group currently working in the middle of updating the CIPP, and from what I understand, they will include the off-grid captive coal into the plan, because currently captive coal also become an issue here and has growing significantly in Indonesia. Other than that, governance has been another area of innovation because JETP Secretariat oversees 4 working groups right now: technical led by the IEA, policy led by the World Bank, finance led by the ADB, and also just transition led by UNDP. So that working group, the target is to ensure that the plan is not only technical robust, but also socially inclusive and financially feasible. And if you ask about the global experience which shaped JETP design, JETP Indonesia design, I think Indonesia's approach has clearly been shaped by a lesson from abroad. So for example, South Africa's JETP highlighted the need for stronger stakeholder trust and fiscal safeguard, while Vietnam Great Bottleneck underscored the importance of transmission upgrades. Other than that, the Philippine ASEAN coal retirement model also over insight into using specific special purpose vehicle, SPV, and also voluntary retirement mechanism. So I think that's what Indonesia learned from the other countries. Indonesia has not just observed global best practice, but also adapted them to fit Indonesia unique energy ecosystem. So I think the result is JETP framework is not only ambitious, but also grounded in international experience. I think I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Mate. I think, yeah, that's essentially what we require right now, learning among the South-South collaboration that we so often talk about. I think that's one version of this, how you learn from each other and take the learnings from and bottlenecks faced by one economy to the other and make sure that does not happen. I think the example that you gave about transmission bottlenecks, Amanda also talked about that. And I think back in India, also, we also have similar experiences of RE being transmission being a bottleneck to growth of the RE sector. So thank you so much. I think while we do have a next round of questions, but we already have so many questions in the Q&A box. So in the paucity of time, probably we can just take up a few questions from here itself. I have a few questions which I think can be directed specifically to a few panelists, but please feel free to jump in and answer any question that you want. So probably, Amanda, there's one question on accessing international climate finance through mechanisms such as the GCF, which have been made excessively complex, extremely rigid, and very difficult to access. There's a need to simplify these processes and make them a lot more flexible. And I think we were also discussing about reforms to the MDB architecture and the architecture of climate funds, how fund flows from these often complex mechanisms. So what do you think, what are the challenges that is faced while accessing capital from these different mechanisms, and what reform do you think is important to bring about over here?
Sure, there's a lot in that question. But I think it goes back to the point that I made earlier on about the pledges being only 7% in grants, right? So grant share is what supports reskilling, social protection, and local economic diversification. And the loans are useful for large infrastructure, but they increase debt pressures if not carefully designed. And our debt to GDP issues. So accessing international funding in the loan format further exacerbates our economic situation. But just to link it back to concessionality, for the transition to be just, we need MDBs and climate funds to provide the more grant-like instruments for the social side of transition. I mean, if we're speaking about the just transition, I mean, the process of decarbonization and getting, alternate infrastructure through factors like renewable projects is great and all, but the whole purpose of the just transition is how it affects people. So the parts that affect people must directly, unfortunately, most remain underfunded at the moment. Let me give you some insight into some of the funding that has happened. Some of it links to international funding, not necessarily from global funders, but also from the African Development Bank. I think maybe let me, before I go into that answer, is just to highlight some of the bottlenecks or the obstruction to getting real progress is that the discussions are often had at the fiscal level, as in the governmental level, and it doesn't flow directly into where projects need to be implemented. And that causes a bit of a constraint, and therefore MDBs and any multilateral discussions need to be more catalytic, so that they can support systemic reforms rather than only individual big transactions such as a big loan. So I mentioned, so I won't go back into the JETP, but we've had what is called the B20 South Africa 2025, which is established an energy mix and just transition task force with priorities including scaling transition finance and localizing clean energy manufacturing, building skills for future energy jobs, as well as investing in resilient grids and infrastructure. The African Development Bank has also committed significant resources, with approximately 2.5 billion rands to $1 billion USD to support a just transition. So investing in renewable energy, worker retraining, and energy governance reforms, just to minimize any economic disruptions. And I think those have been key. So from an international perspective, the climate finance that we have received is more geared towards infrastructure, the infrastructure part of the just transition, and not the social transition aspects.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. I think that's really good to understand. There's another question on the private capital stack. Someone wants to know, has written, private investors often see just transition as a cost rather than an opportunity. What innovative revenue streams or business models could change that perception? Nick, do you want to take this up? And maybe if you could just highlight the other issue of the availability of sustainability related information for an investor to actually make an informed decision on the social aspects of a particular corporate's ESG transition. You're on mute, Nick.
Still on mute. That's terrible, isn't it? So we worked a lot with pension funds and commercial banks and so on, who recognize just transition as a very strategic enabling factor. I think, as we just heard very eloquently from Amanda, many of the social expenditures will have to come from government non-revenue based sources, but there are real roles that the private finance sector can play, both from a sort of social risk management point of view, to make sure that if you're an investor or a bank, that the companies you're investing in, utility companies, oil companies, mining companies, that these companies actually have very strong social standards, labor standards, human rights standards. But also, I think maybe there's a piece which is sometimes forgotten, is that there is huge value creation opportunities in just transition, particularly in growth markets. And so I think that is an area where investors are increasingly thinking through in terms of workforce development, in terms of community relations. These are positive value drivers. And for that, for both these things, the social risk and the value creation, you need information. Now, one of the things we've seen, and my colleague Sangeeth Selvaraju at the LSE has been doing work on this, is we have reporting frameworks. In India, there's the Business Responsibility Sustainability Reporting Framework, BRSR. Countries have these. South Africa has a long tradition of disclosures. And we need to think how we can use these already for just transition purposes. And not reinvent the wheel. We can't. Disclosure is not going to save us, but it's very important. And have some simple sort of metrics which allow investors to evaluate how far companies are going. And also then maybe just, if I may, metrics which can be used for financial instruments such as sustainability-linked loans or green bonds. We heard, I think, from Pedro talking about that, where we have sustainability-linked bonds. Some specific metrics which are robust and can be used to reflect just transition priorities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nick. Pedro, I think there is one specific question for you. So Hari wants to know, in Brazil, how did you counter the resistance from the fossil fuel lobby to channel funds towards green just transition? If that's correct. And if you could just probably answer in a minute or so. And I probably want to take one more question if it's possible. So yeah, over to you.
Great, Santanu. Thank you, Hari, for the question. Actually, there's not resistance from the fossil fuel to these channel funds towards green transition, because the royalties that the companies pay or other kinds of taxes, they are already there. So it's more a matter of the choose that the leaders can have of what to do with this funding. Now the talk in Brazil is not exactly on that. The talks is more on the fight is on opening new fields of exploration. There is this whole discussion of starting to explore or not a new reserve, which is in the north of Brazil, in front of Amazon, on the exit of the Amazon River. So there is this talk if we should open new frontiers of exploration or not, but not exactly the problem on the how to use the public funding from that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pedro. I think you actually ended in under a minute, I would say. I just want to take one more question if it's possible. I know we've run out of time. But Mutya, I really wanted to know from you. I think that's a very pertinent question for you. JT Finance is largely centered on coal-heavy economies, and I think you've had actual experiences with that. So how can countries without such dependence, but with deep social vulnerabilities in sectors like agriculture and informal labor, adapt these models to their own energy transition? So essentially moving from a model which is a GT model based on coal-heavy economies to moving to other sectors also where GT is also pertinent. If you could just answer that.
Okay, yes, Indonesia is one of the most dependent country on coal. So if we want to move that community, it's important to have a discussion like the discussion between government and also every stakeholders, and perhaps like having the technical assistance and also job training, capacity building, local development, and community resilience. So the transition benefit everyone, not only like the small portion of stakeholders. So I think it's important to have that discussion between each stakeholders. Hope it helps.
Thank you so much. Definitely helps. At least, make this clear for me. Thank you so much to all the speakers for sharing your insights, thoughts, experiences on setting up credible just transition mechanisms, platforms, and moving capital beyond sort of plans to actual implementation projects. And with that, I would like to invite Nick to provide the closing remarks for this session. Over to you, Nick.
In 3 seconds, I think, is the answer.
If you can.
This has been really good. And I think what it's shown, obviously, as we move towards COP30, where we have the Baku to Belém roadmap to be presented and negotiated, is among the many, many priorities for increasing capital flows into Global South. We really need to think very, very carefully about how to build up this war chest of grants, low-cost grant and concessional funding for the just transition. And I'm not sure that, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not sure there's a particular focus. It'd be really interesting to see leading countries, and we have India, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia here, major economies. Actually, a real focus on a dedicated, how do we ensure that we have a dedicated focus, whether it's 40 billion a year or whatever, on the social investment, if we call it that. That would be a really interesting initiative, so it doesn't get lost. And I think that's a major lesson of the JETPs. And I think that would be something which, again, would be broadly supported by citizens in the Global North as well. So maybe that's a positive thing to be working on. How do we actually really focus on an instrument across countries? The big players we've got in this panel, but the 100+ other countries who also need finance.
Sure. Thank you so much, Nick, for leaving us with that thought. And with that, I would like to end the session for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And I request you to reach out to the speakers directly if you have some questions that have not been answered. And have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.